I came into possession of a book this last week, Merchants of Doubt. It is a small-sized book, as you can see. I wish it had been about half as large again, because the print inside of it is quite small. So I wish it had been larger, then they could have used larger print. But it's a super book, Merchants of Doubt. On the front it says here, how a handful of scientists obscured the truth on issues from tobacco smoke to global warming. On the back, Merchants of Doubt tells the controversial story of how a loose-knit group of high-level scientists and scientific advisors with deep connections into politics and industry ran effective campaigns to mislead the public and deny well-established scientific knowledge over 4 decades. The same individuals who claim the science of global warming is not settled have also denied the truth about studies linking smoking to lung cancer, coal smoke to acid rain, and CFCs to the ozone hole. Doubt is our product, in quotes. Doubt is our product, wrote one tobacco executive. These experts supplied it. A quote from Science. It is tempting to require all of those engaged in the business of conveying scientific information to the general public should read this book. From Western Australia, a magazine called West Australian. A hard-hitting thriller, also a meticulously researched history book, and a portal into the world of real science, a fascinating story. From Choice, excellent, important. From Elizabeth Colbert, Merchants of Doubt should finally put to rest the question of whether the science of climate change is settled. It is, and we ignore this message at our peril. The chapters in the book. Chapter 1 is Doubt is Our Product. Chapter 2, Strategic Defense, Phony Facts, and the creation of the George C. Marshall Institute. Chapter 3, Sowing the Seeds of Doubt, Acid Rain. Chapter 4, Constructing a Counter-Narrative, the Fight Over the Ozone Hole. Chapter 5, What's Bad Science? Who Decides? The Fight Over Secondhand Smoke. Chapter 6, The Denial of Global Warming. Chapter 7, The Denial Rises Again, the revisionist attack on Rachel Carson. She lived in the 1960s. She wrote the book Silent Spring, which I have read. Excellent book indeed. And then they have the conclusion here of Free Speech and Free Markets, Epilogue, A New View of Science. The notes for all of this are covered from page 279 to 343, and as you can see, the printing and the writing is even smaller for the notes. So it is absolutely loaded with the notes where all of this information came from in being able to write this book. Now, the denials of global warming, climate change, these people would have to deny somehow that the North Pole is not melting, and the North Pole is melting, but they would somehow have to deny that. They would have to deny that the South Pole is melting. They would have to somehow get around the fact that we now have the Northwest Passage, and tourist boats are going through the Northwest Passage for tourists. And that was never was able to be done until the last, well, half a dozen years or so. They have looked through the centuries for the Northwest Passage. They were never able to find it because it wasn't there. It wasn't there because there was too much ice up there. Now there isn't. And now the polar bears are in trouble. And if you want to take a voyage through the Northwest Passage, you can now do so. Deniers would have to deny that Greenland is melting, and the dogs there, the dogs that we used to go over the ice to catch the various fish and seals and whatever the people live on in ice in Greenland, those dogs now have no work. Seen a program recently showing this in one town where the dogs are just chained up and there is no work for them to do because the ice and the snow and everything that used to be there is no longer there. The deniers would have to deny that Greenland is melting. The deniers would have to deny that England is warming up. There are now, believe it or not, a fact, there are 40 vineyards in England and Wales, 40 of them producing wine. Wine in the British Isles, unheard of until the last 10 or 15 years or so. They would have to deny, the deniers would have to deny that this year in Canada, in the north, we had permafrost coming up out of the ground, which had been there for centuries upon centuries. And the towns were collapsing, hillsides were collapsing, that they are in dire straits up there in that part of Canada. Something that is unknown has happened this year of 2019. Permafrost coming out of the Canadian north. These deniers would have to deny that since 1925, the Canadian Rockies has lost dozens of glaciers. Dozens of them, not just a few, dozens of them since 1925. The deniers would have to deny what's happening to the coral reefs around the world. Many of them are dying. The deniers would have to deny ocean warming. Ocean warming. Yeah, there's no L in that word. Ocean warming. They would have to deny ocean. I don't know where I'm getting ocean from. Ocean rising. The deniers would have to deny the crazy weather patterns that we are having today around the world, in North America, all over the world, it seems. Crazy weather patterns and unheard of storms and everything. A good third of the United States is still going through a summer of a heat wave that will not stop, as some people are calling it. And we here in Alberta are going through colder weather than is normal. My story. I came to Canada when I was 18. Came to Saskatoon, Saskatchewan. Look it up on a map. About the middle of Canada. It's on the prairies. Canada was famous as I was a teenager growing up. Canada was famous for its long, cold winters. When I was coming at the age of 18 to Canada, people asked me, why are you going to a cold country? Well, I had other reasons to come into Canada, but Canada was famous for its long, cold winters. It was famous for its red coat mounted police. It was famous for Niagara Falls, but especially it was famous for being a country with long, cold winters. I came to Saskatoon 1961. Through those 60s, we had long, cold winters. People would say to me, well, Keith, you come to a cold climate of Canada. We have long winters here. Learn how to skate, do some skating, do some tobogganing, do some skiing, get into the winter sports. You've come to a country that has long, cold winters, so get used to it. During the 60s, we had in Saskatoon many winters where we had, on the Fahrenheit scale, where we had minus 30 for 5 weeks in a row. Sometimes it would come up to 0 and we think it was summertime. It felt so good. And that was 0 on the Fahrenheit scale. And then it would only last for a few days or so and be back down to the minus 30 again. Long, cold winters during the 1960s. I remember them well. We do not get that kind of weather today in Canada unless you're up by the North Pole. But all of the main living section of Canada, if we get minus 30 Fahrenheit or minus 30 Celsius for 1 week, it's on the national news. Canada, and I've lived in different parts of Canada over my lifetime. So I can attest to, it is obvious to see for anybody that's lived in Canada for 60 years like myself, know, and especially if you lived in different parts of Canada, you know that the Canadian climate has changed. It is warming up and still warming up. And yet we have deniers that deny that there is global warming, deny that there is climate change. Well, I've lived through it for 60 years in Canada, and I certainly know that Canada's climate is changing and it's warming up. And apparently the latest news was Canada's warming up twice as fast as the rest of the world. And certainly the northern Canada is just warming up like crazy, where you've had the permafrost that has been in there for thousands of years. Those Eskimos have lived up there for thousands of years, and it's never happened. It happened this year. The permafrost coming out of the ground. And those people are witnesses to the fact that they and their ancestors have lived there for thousands of years, and it has never happened before. The fact is that these doubters, these naysayers, really need to go back to school. They really need to learn how to put the left shoe on the left foot and the right shoe on the right foot. They really need to learn how that the left arm goes in the left arm of the shoulder of the shirt and the right arm goes in the right arm sleeve of the shirt. They are indeed a very, very small percentage of the scientists in the world today. 97% or more of science around the world, with all of their gadgets, with all of their lookouts, with all of their temperature gauges, with all of this and that scattered all over the world today, including satellites, are telling you the fact that we are in global warming and that we are in climate change. And if you can find this book, you need to read it. It's very factual, very interesting, and it shows you the truth of climate change, of global warming.